Fox's Catherine Herridge is reporting tonight that Rod Rosenstein threatened to subpoena emails and phone records from Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee in January. It's an explosive story. We're going to ask the Attorney General about it directly in just a minute. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. The first ever meeting between a sitting American president and a North Korean leader has finished. President Trump and Kim Jong Un met one another in Singapore, put their names on a new deal that seeks to reduce tensions on the Korean peninsula. What's in the deal and what else has happened in the summit's wake? For that, we go to Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry, who is in Singapore right now. Ed?
Tucker, great to see you. President Trump came, he saw, and he got a deal, despite all of the naysayers trying to talk down the possibility of American success before, during, and after these talks. The president tonight, in fact, is going to go on offense, try to sell this deal on Hannity next hour, telling Fox that Kim Jong Un is going to start denuclearization virtually immediately with the document they signed here, which he says could save millions of lives by preventing nuclear war. Remarkable, coming just weeks after North Korea again threatened a nuclear conflict. During one of their walks together, Kim was actually overheard through his interpreter telling the president these pictures were so surreal that many in the world, quote, will think of this as a form of fantasy from a science fiction movie. Democrats like Chuck Schumer tonight are warning this may be an actual fantasy, since Kim made no specific commitment to get rid of his nukes, while the president promised to end joint military exercises with South Korea. That has some of our allies concerned. But Republicans like Senator John Kennedy today think on balance this is a good agreement. Kennedy saying today that working with Kim is like hand feeding a shark. You can do it, but you've got to do it very, very carefully. Tucker?
Great metaphor. Great. Thanks, Ed. Is the new deal with North Korea actually a deal? Is it good for the United States? Can we trust the North Koreans to follow it? Doug McGregor is a retired U.S. Army colonel, author of the book Margin of Victory. Congressman Jeff Fortenberry is a Republican, represents the state of Nebraska, and both of them join us tonight. Congressman, first to you. Is this a deal Americans ought to be happy about?
Well, the best word that I can use to describe the last few days, in my mind, is stunning. I think the president's actions here are bold, they're historic. It's almost unimaginable, given where we were just 6 months ago, where we were on the precipice of some type of even potential nuclear exchange. The president has leaned into something pretty radical here, and perhaps he's creating a new architecture for 21st century diplomacy. He has said to Kim Jong Un, we're going to deal with you, for good or for ill. And if it's for ill and you move your finger toward a nuclear button, we're going to hurt you. But if it's for good, I want to create the space for perhaps authentic dialogue and even friendship, and I think he accomplished that. He has rejected the norms of ossified proceduralism and stagnation that governed so many international affairs, and he took a bold risk, and I think he delivered something very important. It's his first step. We are holding out hope, obviously, for a greater vision that could evolve here, but it's an important and good first step.
Ossified proceduralism, a phrase I'm stealing. Colonel, are you as optimistic about it?
Extremely. I think this is Donald Trump's finest hour, and I'm absolutely serious. Donald Trump has recognized something that others have refused to see for a very long time in Washington. It's not simply that North Korea is on the ropes. It is. It's on the verge of collapse. Donald Trump understood that, and that's one of the reasons he was able to put the pressure on North Korea the way he did. But he also went to great lengths in his meetings with President Xi to forge an understanding with China. He treated President Xi as an equal, treated China as an equal, and I think Donald Trump understands something that is not well understood in the Pentagon at this point, or in many other places in Washington, and that our competition with China is essentially economic and technological. It is not military. And that was the key development, because without China, none of this would have happened.
Yes, that's right. And I think it clearly stemmed from what he said about trade with China. Congressman, there's been a lot of criticism of this deal from the left along the lines that the president is giving away important American advantages in exchange for nothing. How would you respond to that?
This is the combination of foreign policy realism and entrepreneurial diplomacy. And as I said, this is not only about potentially preventing a conflict and opening up a new chapter and rejecting a stalemate of the last 65 years with North Korea, but it also could signal a new way, a new architecture for diplomatic relations moving forward. Look, the world is screaming for for some type of new interpersonal ecosystem, both in our homes and in our communities, as well as between nations. And what that means is that we have to have the ability to reach out and provide authenticity and dialogue and create some space, because the world is racing toward destructive technology. And then what? Civilization itself is at stake, and we've got to find a way forward toward mutuality and well-being and mutual security, or else we don't have much hope.
But, I mean, Colonel, that's a lot of what we have heard liberals, and some conservatives, by the way, criticize, the idea that you meet with someone who is morally out of bounds, like Kim Jong Un. Going forward, should we be willing to meet with anybody?
Oh, absolutely. And I think Donald Trump is a disruptive force, let's be frank. He's disrupting the status quo. Lots of people in this town are very upset because this threatens to change the distribution of cash. This threatens budgets. This threatens force structures. This threatens a number of things. He recognized early on when he was campaigning that South Korea is a powerful state, infinitely more powerful than North Korea and quite capable of defending itself. He recognized that Japan is also in the same position. In fact, if Japan raises its investment in military power by just 1%, Japan will be number 3 in the world in terms of a defense budget. He understands that what Northeast Asia wants and needs is stability, order, and prosperity, not war. And I think he's got the agreement of everyone who counts in the region.
That's an amazing statistic about Japan, by the way, which most of us consider demilitarized. Apparently not. Colonel, Congressman, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Really
thank you.
What effect will this summit have on the rest of Asia? A meaningful question for the rest of the world. Michael Pillsbury is the man to answer it. He's a senior fellow and director of Chinese strategy at the Hudson Institute, author of maybe the single best book recently on China called The 100 Years Marathon, China's Secret Strategy to Replace America as the Global Superpower. Dr. Pillsbury joins us tonight. So what effect, Michael Pillsbury, does this have on the rest of Asia, if any, right now?
Well, it doesn't have much effect on the rest of Asia until more is revealed by President Trump of what the next steps are going to be. He's laid the foundation for moving forward. He's sent Secretary Pompeo up to Beijing. I myself have heard from the Chinese already that they are taking credit for this. They're a little bit hurt that President Trump did not give them any credit when he was in Singapore. They feel they sent the plane, they put the pressure on, they did the sanctions, they voted for these UN Security Council resolutions 3 times that made the toughest sanctions in history. They all but pushed Chairman Kim into this. And here is their friend Donald Trump, not tipping his hat to them. So, but the president, as you know, is not finished talking about this yet.
To think of the Chinese Politburo as having a heart and being having its feelings hurt. That's so interesting.
Well, we don't care if their feelings are hurt. I'm going to Beijing tomorrow, so I got to be careful what I say, Tucker.
Yes.
But I would say the reaction in Asia depends on how much concern they had about any given country had about nuclear weapons in North Korea. So down in Southeast Asia, this is not really a topic. They're much more concerned about the South China Sea. Is the U.S. really going to have some ships that go inside the 12-mile boundary and then have helicopter operations or swerve around and not request innocent passage? This is not a technical matter. Under the law of the sea, there are 5 things that if you do that, you are saying, I dispute this claim. We have not done those 5 things. We usually go in with our radar turned off. We don't do swerving turns. We don't launch helicopters. So we're recognizing the Chinese claim at the same time we're mildly challenging it. This is a big issue in Southeast Asia. When Taiwan, they're still waiting for the F-16 replacements. They asked for 55 F-16 jet fighters about 10 years ago. 48 or so U.S. senators wrote a letter. They held up the Deputy Secretary of State, give these jet fighters to Taiwan. They're for sale. They're not really gifts. That has still not happened. So Taiwan is kind of wondering what is their future. In Japan, they've got a series of issues they want to hear more about. So the North Korea issue, as you know very well, Tucker, is really a bit more about the United States feeling vulnerable to a kind of crazy person with H-bombs and 50 ICBMs, if that's what it should come to. That problem seems to be taken care of. So Americans can be happy.
Amazing.
We can admire President Trump. He's done something for us. But the rest of Asia is still waiting for answers to a broader Asia strategy, I think. And President Trump is working on that. That's what his team has been telling me.
I'd be worried if I lived in Taiwan. Michael Pillsbury, thank you very much. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Just a few months ago, the press was upset about President Trump's overly aggressive posture toward North Korea. Now they're claiming he is too friendly to North Korea. We'll try to make sense of that next.
Tucker Carlson is brought to you by Experience.
It was just a few months ago that the press was in love with North Korea because of their impressive Olympic delegation and publicly feared President Trump was about to start a war with them. Remember that? Well, during yesterday's summit, the president was friendlier. So was MSNBC. Happy? No. Here's the selection.
It is not knowable that we'll ever know what happened in that meeting, because both men are known and established liars.
I would say it's somewhat disgusting. It is actually a debasement of the American flag.
Donald Trump can relate to authoritarians. He, as a former businessman, he likes absolute control. And
is he a wannabe despot?
I've conceded that for years now.
And the frenzy continued over at the Washington Post. Ishan Tharoor said that the summit showed Trump's, quote, affinity for dictators. CNN analyst and avid pro-war activist Max Boot dismissed the whole summit as something any U.S. prior president could have achieved, though none did. In The Week magazine, David Linker said that even a successful summit would be bad because it would improve Trump's approval ratings. And that, quote, could only be considered positive if you think it's a good thing for our mendacious, hapless, impetuous, racist president to enjoy an unprecedented boost to his popularity. In other words, if it works, that's bad because Trump will benefit. Joe Concha covers media for The Hill, and he joins us tonight. So you've been watching the coverage, Joe. Sum it up for us.
Well, that last line is interesting because it sounds a lot like Tucker, Bill Maher on Friday night, who said, bring on a recession, even if it cripples families and people across the country, because that would be the only thing that could get Trump from being reelected. In other words, and by the way, Maher is worth, something like $100 million. He gets $10 million a year. So if Trump is gone, who cares if we go to war or if we go to recession? As long as liberals can triumph in terms of getting rid of Trump, that's all that matters. But I noticed in that montage, it was very interesting. You played Nicole Wallace. And she used to be a member of the Bush administration, right? She was a communications director. You played Elise Jordan, who was a member of the Bush administration. I heard Jeremy Bash, who was in the Obama administration, the DOD. What do all these people have in common? They all worked in administrations that failed miserably in stopping North Korea's nuclear program. So if you're a viewer and you're sitting at home, you have to ask yourself this very question. Why are we listening to these people? I mean, they failed in Iran, Syria, Iraq, you name it, depending on the administration. And they're presented as experts when obviously they have an agenda because they want to protect either their own legacies or the legacies of their bosses. It would be like turning to Jack Kevorkian to teach a class in the Heimlich maneuver. It's a complete contradiction.
It's a very good point.
That was organic.
But
that
couldn't
just
that
came
be
to me.
said? Well, it's apt. But couldn't that be said of so many different issues in which analysts on television are implicated in failing policies that were rejected by voters? And so why wouldn't their contempt be baked in? Why wouldn't they hate all of this? Because it basically points up how badly they did their jobs.
Right, and it's the uncouth president that is actually succeeding in this case. I mean, I understand the criticism completely around whether this is a success or not, because they're very broad strokes. But then again, we're in the first out of the first inning, and unless every I is dotted and T is crossed, then it's being considered a failure. But to your point earlier with another guest, think of where we were in August when President Trump said that North Korea will see a fire and fury like the world has never seen. And if you go back and read those headlines, we were on the precipice of World War III. Guam was being threatened. We had actual maps of what nuclear missiles could hit Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. Think of where we were then and think of where we are now in terms of talking to this leader, having them agree, at least in broad strokes, around denuclearization. That is progress. No matter how you try to spin it, that has to be seen as progress, except it's not presented that way because there's always a reflex to the negative when it comes to this administration, even in the most obvious situation when there really isn't much negative things to complain about when you put it in the full context.
Very quickly, is there any indication that any of these self-described experts knows anything about North Korea at all?
I don't know if many people know much about North Korea, right? I mean, how many of them have actually been there? Any journalists, for that matter, or any experts in this regard. So I would say no. And again, when you have a Clinton, a Bush, and an Obama administration that failed over 25 years doing the same thing in terms of nice talk and appeasement, and then somebody else comes in and does something different, you are in no position whatsoever to complain about these things. And that's the final point I want to make, Tucker, that we're very good in this business about complaining about stuff. And that's all I've heard over the last 48 hours. Complaint. But when you're watching this coverage, listen for this. Is anybody offering an alternative or a solution as to what they would do as opposed to what they've witnessed over the last 48 hours? Because I haven't seen it yet, Tucker.
Well, how about just stand back and be amazed for a minute? Because it is amazing. That's how I feel about it anyway. Joe, great to see you.
Stunning. Your guest used stunning before, and that's correct.
It's true. Thanks. Up next, Attorney General Jeff Sessions just reversed an Obama-era policy that promoted migration from Latin America. He's here to talk about it and also to respond to a remarkable new story. Fox News is reporting Rod Rosenstein, Deputy AG, threatened Republicans on the House Intel Committee. That's next. Attorney General Jeff Sessions occasionally endures Twitter criticism from his boss, but that has not frozen him into inaction. Just yesterday, the Attorney General reversed an Obama-era policy that granted asylum to migrants who claimed they feared gang violence or domestic violence in their home countries. It turns out the overwhelming majority of those applications were false. The Attorney General joins us tonight. Mr. Attorney General, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thank you, Tucker.
So I want to ask you about this, but first I have to ask you about a piece of breaking news our Catherine Herridge just has out saying that in January of this year, January 10th, Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein went up to the Hill, met with Republican members of the House Intel Committee, had a dispute with them, and threatened them with a subpoena of their emails and phone records. This is what one of them said. I read it as a not-so-veiled threat to unleash the full prosecutorial power of the state against us. DOJ on background has confirmed that something like that did happen. What is that about?
Well, I don't know that they've confirmed that exactly. In fact, the FBI director, the senior ethics attorney for the Department of Justice who was in the room, say that's a mischaracterization, really, of what occurred. And it also, I think, indicates that there's been a breakdown of relationships when, in fact, since January, a great deal of progress has been made. We understand in this department that we are accountable to the president, we are accountable to Congress, and we need to be cooperative with them to produce as many documents as rationally and legally and properly as can be produced, to produce them. And we've made tremendous progress in that regard, really.
Did the Deputy Attorney General threaten to subpoena the email or phone records of members of the House Intel Committee?
Well, I was not in the room, and I can't speak to what occurred. All I can say is that the people at Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, and our senior ethics attorney was there, and others, and did not see it in that same fashion.
Okay, so as a factual matter, you don't think that that happened?
I'm confident that Deputy Rosenstein, 28 years in the Department of Justice, did not improperly threaten anyone on that occasion. But we do believe that we have tried to be cooperative with them and made progress in months as the months have gone by, and in fact have had some good relationships with top members of Congress.
Okay. So you have made news recently by undoing an Obama-era rule about asylum seekers. Give us the overview. I think most Americans like the idea that this would be a haven for people suffering around the world. Lots of people claim asylum. What do we know about the veracity of their claims?
That's a good question. 7 years ago, 5,000 people were applied for asylum, claiming a credible fear of being at home in their home country, and they needed to flee that country. That number jumped to 94,000 in just 7 years. It's overwhelming our system. Over 80% of those claims are being denied by the immigration judges as being not meritorious. So it is a big problem for us, but it's each one of those is requiring trials and factual decisions by our judges. We're going to add 100 judges, and that may not yet be enough judges to handle the cases. We need to give the judges better guidance. They need to go back to the fundamental principles and laws and rules of the Immigration and Nationalization Act. And if we do that, then we're in a position where some of these cases can be promptly decided. You do not get to come to America if you have a private threat or someone personally attacks you. You do not get to have asylum for that. It's based on your race, your religion, your nationality, that you're part of some special identifiable group that's being persecuted in your home country. That's what it takes to have an asylum, and we need to get this straight, and I think it will help us. The decision I made, I believe it's right legally. I'm totally confident it's consistent with the intent of the drafters of the INA, our law, and I believe it will help us manage our caseloads better and give more focus to the people who deserve to be given asylum and help us eliminate those that are not worthy of this asylum.
Well, if over 80% of the applications are fraudulent, there's obviously a problem. So the DOJ has also recently weighed in on the question of speech on campus. What can the federal government do, the Department of Justice do, to ensure that people's First Amendment rights are protected? And why is it take until 2018 to get DOJ involved in this?
It's one of the big challenges of our time. I have come to believe, and it's almost unbelievable, that major colleges and universities would be taking action that restrict the right of free speech on a college campus. It's just got to be confronted. We have the authority under law to file a statement of interest in an ongoing litigation. So cases are being filed against the universities by students who complain, and if we think their complaints are meritorious, then we can file a statement of interest joining with them and explaining why we at the Department of Justice thinks these concerns are real and justified, and a court relief is appropriate. So we've had some success. We've had 2 cases where there's been a major change in the college and university's actions, and 2 cases where the judge has dismissed or rejected a motion to dismiss these cases by the universities and allowing the trials to go forward. We think it's a very important thing. Students should be participating in robust debate. They ought not to be intimidated. They ought not to be driven by political correctness to where you can't even speak up in class or on campus.
It's just amazing what an upside-down world it is when a conservative attorney general is defending the First Amendment against liberals. It's like things have changed almost too much. Mr. Attorney General, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
MS-13 gang members are menacing kids at a school just a few miles from the White House. Why are so many so determined to defend them? That is next.
I'll shoot.
Less than 10 miles from the White House, a middle school is being terrorized by MS-13. It's called William Wirt Middle School. It's in Riverdale, Maryland. And it's one of many whose makeup has been changed entirely and almost overnight by mass settlement of unaccompanied minors entering this country from Latin America. Now, according to the Washington Post, MS-13 members in the school start fights, sell drugs, rape fellow students. Teachers say they fear being alone with a lot of these kids. They also fear saying anything about it because speaking out could cost them their jobs. It's a tragedy that can be traced almost entirely to U.S. immigration policy, but elites don't seem to care at all and, in fact, crush any conversation about it by screaming, "Racist!" Needless to say, their kids will never attend William Wirt Middle School or anything even approaching it. Jose Aristimuño is a former DNC press secretary, and he joins us tonight. Jose, thank you for coming on.
Good to be with you.
What I found ironic about this story was this is this kind of third iteration of the MS-13 story. First, we were told they don't really exist. It's a figment of your racist imagination. Then we were told to attack them and call them names is immoral because they're good people. Okay. And now we have the Washington Post telling us in detail about how they've destroyed this middle school and are terrorizing the students. Are we allowed to acknowledge that, or are we bigots for doing so?
Well, no, let me start by saying this. If you're undocumented in this country, if you're a criminal, including being a member of MS-13, we don't want you in this country and you should be deported. Part of the issue here, Tucker, is that people like yourself and some Republicans want to pinpoint and just simply say because your first name Jose or you're Latino like me, I'm automatically an MS-13 gang member. And that is not true. A majority of immigrants in this country
you're
are
ridiculous.
good
Stop. You're a ridiculous person for saying that. I've never suggested anything like that. It's appalling that you would say that. I don't think that, and I've never suggested it.
I will speak the truth.
You're speaking a lie, and not for the first time. What I said is what I read in the Washington Post, which is self-identified gang members are destroying the school and terrorizing people. I bet you don't have kids at that school. I bet you never send your kids to that school. But you've got no problem with those people being in this country because it fits some sort of demographic plan that you approve of.
No, that is not true.
The truth is it's a disaster.
That is not true. I just said it. If you're an MS-13 gang member, if you're undocumented, you should be deported. A majority of people who are
undocumented. No. Then why have you consistently attacked anybody? No, yeah, right. Nobody has said that the majority of immigrants are criminals or bad. I'm not saying that. I don't think it. What I am saying is that we don't know the identity of people coming. He has not said that. You're lying for political gain, as always. What I have said, and what I think many normal people have said, is that we don't know who's coming into this country. We don't know anything about them. There are 20 million of them living here. We don't know their identities, their backgrounds.
I got an idea for you.
And some of them are bad people.
Okay, so you know what we do? Let me tell you what we do. We pass comprehensive immigration reform. We legalize a majority of people. It would be a whole lot easier, Tucker, to actually look for the real criminals if we legalize the good ones. Don't you think so?
How would, yeah. I mean, it's hilarious that solution comports exactly with your political goal, which is to create more Democratic voters.
Oh my goodness, give me a break. That's not, no.
Really, tell me rationally how, if illegal immigration, the inability of the U.S. government to know who's living within its borders is the problem, how encouraging more of it, which is what amnesty would do, is the solution. There's no logical answer to that, because this is not something you're interested in solving.
Okay, so your answer, and to many Republicans' answer, is to deport the 14 million illegal immigrants and undocumented immigrants in this country. That's your solution.
So we're guessing at that number. Some people think it's 20 million.
Okay,
I think
20 million, 14 million. What do we do?
When wage growth has been stagnant and the cost of everything is growing much faster than the growth in wages, you need to stop the ability of employers to hire cheaper people because they're here illegally. We need to make E-Verify mandatory. You cannot hire people here illegally. No. Look, if you bothered to learn anything about this subject, if you took it seriously, we're bigger than a political issue,
I take it very seriously.
No, you don't know nothing about it. Then you would find it.
I am telling you that we have a choice to make us Americans.
About it.
I know more than you.
Then why should an employer? You know nothing. You know nothing.
I know more than you.
Why would an employer in this country be allowed to hire someone illegally, depressing wages for American citizens?
You want to fix that? You want to fix that problem? We reform the system. We legalize the people that are already here.
You could do
That's what we do.
Legalize it. No, you could do it tomorrow. Why should employers be allowed to hire illegal aliens?
I'm going to say it again.
Look right in the camera and tell me why they should be allowed to do that.
We got two choices here, Tucker. We got two choices. We deport the 14 million or 20 million, whatever number, or we legalize them.
This is just
we put them in a path to citizenship so we can actually get them out of the shadow. No, we get them out of the shadow.
I don't have time for conversations with people who don't know what they're talking about and haven't thought it through and want to come on and spew more talking points and call anybody who disagrees a racist, which is what you did in the very first sentence of this segment.
Because that's what you guys have done from the very beginning.
Yeah, you're pathetic. Bill Clinton was one of the savviest politicians in American history, but he can't stop destroying himself with his own mouth. Hilarious what he has said recently. We've got the tape for you. Thank you. We'll be right back. Bill Clinton's on a roll recently, you may have noticed. In a recent interview with PBS, Clinton pointed out that it's a lot harder to sexually harass people these days than it used to be back then. And of course, he would know. Watch.
I think the norms have really changed in terms of what you can do to somebody against their will, how much you can crowd their space, make them miserable at work.
Tammy Bruce is a New York radio show host, and she joins us. You know, Tammy, the norms have really changed about what you can do to someone against his will.
Yes.
I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah,
it's very different now. You used to be able to do a lot of things against people's will. What is that?
Hillary may be sharing the Chardonnay with her husband. I'm not quite sure.
So
this is what most people have of course, remarked on, is that for Bill Clinton, it was normal to do things to people against their will. But this is a newsflash from Mr. Clinton. Unless you were back in maybe the Bronze Age, maybe not even then, in modern life here in America, the American Revolution kind of made it that everybody had some rights, and then we became a better country. And the good news is, in the recent modern era, we've learned that you can't do anything to people against their will. It's the concept, of course, of law and order. So we've managed to achieve that, and it was applied when he was president. Apparently he wasn't aware of that. But it tells you, and I think this is what's revealing about Bill Clinton, it's what's termed as the compulsion to confess, is that in his time, that you could do whatever you wanted. But the fact is, they knew then that they really couldn't. The difference was is that they got away with it, and they protected each other. And I think for both he and his wife, they want that era back. They want the times back, the good old days, when in fact they could do whatever they wanted. And I think this is it's probably was much more comfortable and controlled for very few at the top. It's very nerve-wracking for individuals who cultivated that era to have this populism arise, where the American people, women and people of color and gays, everybody who's been a minority in power or in life, actually, because of new media and because of the populism now that's moving, is that we want the Constitution to be clear. We want rights. We want to be safe in our lives. We still want that conservative ideal. A lot of people don't realize it's a conservative ideal, to live lives that best suit us without being attacked and without needing to deal with people like Harvey Weinstein and Bill Clinton.
I think that's exactly right. And it has been at least the Bronze Age since people were allowed to do whatever they wanted against someone else's will.
That's, the pulling by someone's hair is kind of,
Right. It's not a modern thing.
No.
So you may have seen the rant at the Tony Awards by actor Robert De Niro, who followed up by apologizing to Canada for the American president. Here's part of what he said.
And I just want to make a note of apology for the idiotic behavior of my president. It's a disgrace. And I apologize to Justin Trudeau and the other people at the G7. It's disgusting.
When you find yourself apologizing to the Canadians, it is by definition a new low. And then the president tweeted this in response, and I'm quoting, "Robert De Niro, a very low IQ individual, has received many shots to the head by real boxers in movies. I watched him last night and truly believe he may be punch drunk. I guess he doesn't realize the economy is the best it's ever been, with employment being at an all-time high and many companies pouring back into our country. Wake up, Punchy!" Exclamation point. Tammy?
He snuck that in between North Korea tweets, right? The world is changing. He's bringing world peace. And he managed to get that in there about Uncle Punchy. Look, Robert De Niro's next movie is War with Grandpa. And I think that you've gone from really raging bull to whining grandpa at this point. It's a shame. Fabulous actor, an American icon that has really declined. And really, it seems that, a lot of people, I think there's jealousy that is rooted in the attacks on the president. There you got with the thing he's doing there with his arms. This is a man who seems to not be secure within his own manhood. And that the president's success is upsetting him. And it is, I think, a lot of people. But for the American people in general, we appreciate the success, securing the future of this country, saving lives. He said about North Korea today, if he can save 30 million people, of course he'd stand on a stage with this guy. It's ironic. They accuse the president of being indecent when they every day show their own indecency. And the American people see this for what it is, I think.
Everything is irony, for sure. Tammy, great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, a follow-up to what is a pretty amazing story out of the FAA. The FAA, we told you last week, has created a new test for selecting air traffic controllers that gives points for relevant criteria. Well, it turns out the FAA has also been cavalier about cheating on that test. Our investigation of the government's dangerous hiring practices continues after the break. Well, we've told you repeatedly over the last couple of weeks about how the FAA, which is in charge of your safety when you travel by air, has altered its merit-based hiring testing for air traffic controllers, adding a bogus biographical questionnaire to the process. The new test's existence is bad enough. They are seeking out the unqualified intentionally. But even more worrisome than that is the fact that the FAA apparently didn't care if people cheated on their already watered-down test. In 2016, the Department of Transportation found that the National Black Coalition of Federal Aviation Employees had given its members guidance on how to answer the biographical questionnaire so they could pass it. In other words, the group helped them cheat by giving them the correct answers ahead of time. Cheating on a federal hiring test is a crime, and it ought to be. And yet, despite that, nobody was ever charged. In fact, one union member connected to the cheating appears to be still employed by the FAA. Michael Pearson is a former air traffic controller. He's an attorney, and he's involved in litigation surrounding the FAA's hiring practices. He joins us tonight. Michael Pearson, thanks a lot for coming on. First, this is such a strong allegation that I want to get to how you know this to be absolutely true.
Well, I've been involved in this since it actually began when I first heard about it with the purging of the list. If folks were watching your show, they remember that you had thousands of people on the list that were qualified, including military experience and aviation experience. It all of a sudden was purged, in the FAA's words, and then folks were forced to go through this biographical questionnaire, which was designed by an outside vendor. And so for the last several years, including litigation that my firm, along with Mountain States Legal Foundation, brought, we've been able to dig up information through the Freedom of Information Act process as well as the litigation process. So not only do we have internal people tell us this was going on, that they were afraid that if they would come forward, the FAA would penalize them, the DOT would penalize them at fairly high levels of the government. But now we have actual documentary evidence that substantiates our worst fears.
So the union helped people cheat on the test, again, just to put this in context, to become air traffic controllers and control commercial aviation. Millions use it every year. People could die as a result of this. And yet no one was ever charged for that? Why?
Well, it wasn't the union. It wasn't the Air Traffic Controllers Union. It was the NBCFA. It's a employee group. The National Black Coalition of Federal Aviation Employees certainly did that. And it was a process started from early to 2012, 2013. There was a group within that organization who determined that the makeup of the workforce was too white. They wanted to get a more diverse workforce. They started lobbying through the political process, which is certainly allowed to. However, they then crafted this BQ exam, which it's not a screening test. It actually turned out that the scoring rubric for that actually penalized people with aviation experience, yes, pilots, air traffic controllers. And then to make it worse, they had folks stand in line for this test that someone in the NBCFA had apparently gotten the answers to and coached other people how to pass the test. So not only were our best and brightest, as the FAA says, actually purged off the list, they then were forced through a screening process that discriminated against them intentionally on the scoring of the test. So most, if not the great majority of them, failed that exam, while people were given the answers and how to pass the test. Even more important, recent documents show that when this individual was interviewed, he gave